Hi, I'm Ben Shapiro, and this is Reality Check. Hillary Clinton is the most transparent woman she knows. She even said so in 2008.
I think I'm probably the most transparent person in public life. I think, 60 books? 60 books have been written. I feel you know a lot more about me than you know about anybody else. Much of it untrue, but nevertheless, it's all out there.
Sadly, Hillary's a liar. When news emerged this week that Hillary had set up a private email server the day before her nomination as Secretary of State and had used her private email address for her entire tenure as Secretary of State so that there were no government records of those emails, and that her aides also used private email addresses, and that her server had the capacity to fully delete emails, and that hackers could have hacked those emails, well, no one should have been surprised. Of course she did. Let's take a trip in the Wayback Machine. When Hillary Clinton was 27, back in 1974, she worked for the House Judiciary Committee, which was then investigating Richard Nixon. According to her boss, a Democrat named Jerry Zeifman, Hillary met with Teddy Kennedy's chief political strategist, which was a violation of House rules. She then manipulated the system to avoid investigating Nixon, hoping he'd stick around long enough to sink Republican election chances in 1976, which she thought would have let her boy Teddy into the White House. According to the guy who shared office space with Hillary, his name was John Labovitz, Hillary gave, quote, erroneous legal opinions and tried to deny Nixon representation by counsel. Zeifman said Hillary wrote a fraudulent legal brief and confiscated public documents. Zeifman fired her. He wouldn't even give her a letter of rec. Zeifman later wrote a book stating that, quote, Hillary Clinton is ethically unfit to be either a senator or president. Now fast forward 20 years. Hillary's the first lady. There's a big search going on for a memo written by a former presidential aide regarding the firing of members of the White House Travel Office. There's a little thing called Travelgate. Well, this memo goes missing for 2 years. At the same time, documents regarding Hillary Clinton's work at the Rose Law Firm in Arkansas, specifically her work regarding a savings and loan company run by the Clintons' business partner in the Whitewater land venture, and they go missing for 2 years. Then, in January 1996, miraculously, they appear. The Rose Law Firm documents magically show up. A White House aide finds them. In the White House, of all places. In a storage area. In the third floor of the White House. In the private residence of the President and First Lady. And the long-lost memo, well, it just shows up a couple of days later. How miraculous. Hillary's lawyers said she had no idea the documents were there. Except that the FBI found Hillary's fingerprints on the documents. Oopsies. Hillary is still the only First Lady in American history to be fingerprinted by the FBI. Now, all that was before the rise of email. But the Clintons loved email because it's so much easier to hide emails than to track down every copy of every document for destruction. And hide emails they did. According to Judicial Watch, Cheryl Mills, Hillary's hatchet woman, helped prevent the Clintons from turning over 1.8 million emails to Judicial Watch and Congress and federal investigators. 1.8 million emails. When a White House computer contractor tried to reveal this, White House officials allegedly told her to, quote, keep her mouth shut. You know that name, Cheryl Mills. You may remember her. She ended up being in charge of document production for Hillary's State Department in the Benghazi investigation. When she was Secretary of State, over and over again, document requests to the State Department were rejected because they didn't have the documents. Hillary did, on her private server. The Associated Press had a stonewall. So did Judicial Watch. So did Gawker. All a big coincidence, of course. It was all a big mix-up when Clinton hitman Sandy Berger stole documents from the National Archives and stuffed them down his pants as well. And now, Hillary has assured us via Twitter she desperately wants the State Department to release all of her hidden emails. We should believe her. After all, she's the most transparent woman in American history. At least, the most transparently corrupt.
Let's start with Mrs.
In just hours, President Trump will decertify the Iran nuclear deal and announce a new strategy on Iran. What does it mean for America's relationship with allies and for America's relationship with Iran? Joining us now is CNN's national security analyst and former director of the CIA and NSA, General Michael Hayden. General, thanks so much for joining us. So help us understand this. What changes today? When the president comes out this morning and decertifies the Iran nuclear deal, what changes?
Well, Allison, perhaps there's a little bit less here than meets the eye, although that doesn't mean it's unimportant. What it means is the president would certify the deal, not because Iran is in material breach of the nuclear arrangements.
In fact, they're
within the
not.
deal.
I mean, just to stop you, in fact, they're not in breach.
No, not. No, and in fact, I was a little nervous as a career intelligence officer that the president, the White House, would pressure the intelligence community to come up with that conclusion. He did not, and the Iranians are not. He will simply decertify it because it is no longer in the strategic interests of the United States, an aspect of law that was given to him by Senator Corker when the Congress looked at this in the first place. So he's going to say it's not consistent with U.S. national interests. But he's not going to do other things he could have done. He had it within his authority last month on his own to reimpose sanctions on the Iranians. He did not do that. He's going to toss this to Congress, but the handshake with even the most hawkish members of the Congress is that we will not impose new sanctions, at least for the short term. So what we've got is a broad signaling that we're unhappy with the deal, and frankly, Allison, more unhappy with all the other things the Iranians are doing, and that's where we want to focus.
And in fact, I think that is where the president will focus in his speech today. Axios has some reporting. I'll read you a couple of headlines. Sources familiar with the speech say that the president is likely to largely focus on Iran's broader non-nuclear activities and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which he thinks has been, infiltrated by terrorists. One source says this is going to be a harsh speech. It's going to be about Iran attacking us. So where does that leave us? What message does that send to our allies and people who want to stay in the deal?
So, first of all, Director Pompeo last night in Texas gave a speech, I think, that builds the case for why we are unhappy with Iranian behavior. And I've looked at the speech and, frankly, agree with every aspect of it in terms of what it is the Iranians are doing. So it's good for us to torque up the pressure on the Iranians here. Now, if the president actually goes out and certifies the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization in its entirety, we will probably see a sharp Iranian response to that step. And here's the complexity now, I think, Allison. We're going to go do these things based upon certain assumptions as to how the Europeans, which I think will be fairly predictable, and how the Iranians, may not be predictable, will react. And so that's why I think you heard folks like Secretary of State Tillerson, Secretary of Defense Mattis, in essence saying they're comfortable with the stability provided by the deal. No real need to decertify, but we can get after the Iranians on all these other activities too.
So just to be clear, you're comfortable with what the president's going to do in giving this speech and decertifying the deal today? I would
make the step of decertifying. I think it's an unnecessary step for what it is we want to do. I think the president's trying to split the baby here. If he gets away with it, it's okay, but he could set in motion events we cannot control, and it may put the Iranian nuclear deal at risk. And as we both agree, Allison, they're not in material breach of that deal. It has put a bit of a stopper in the Iranian nuclear program.
So then what's the allies' response today?
So I think the Europeans kind of sit and watch. They'll be broadly supportive of our complaints about the other Iranian activity. They will not line up with regard to decertifying the nuclear deal. They'll want to keep us on side. They will not want the Congress to reimpose sanctions for those nuclear things. And so they'll be a bit more willing to cooperate with us to put pressure on the Iranians for the non-nuclear things. Again, the president's trying to go through a fairly narrow passage here to get what it is he wants. And frankly, can I add just one additional thought, Allison? I think he can do this without decertifying. I think decertifying is in the list of the Paris Agreement, Obamacare, a whole bunch of other things that the president has done simply to show that he's not Barack Obama.
All right, we'll see what happens today. General Michael Hayden, thanks so much for walking us through it.
Thank you.
Chris.
All right, as somewhat of an odd extension of a political spat, it seems, the president